what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Foot Candle Films. Film news and reviews from two guys who really like movies.
This episode is brought to you by the Foot Candle Film Society. For a schedule of upcoming screenings and membership information, visit the Society's website at www.footcandle.org.
Hello and welcome to Foot Candle Films here on the Mesh.tv podcast network. My name is Alan Jackson. With me is Chris Fry. We are the co-founders and co-directors of the Foot Candle Film Society and the annual Foot Candle Film Festival. Chris, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm looking forward to talking about our first new film of 2024.
Is that true? That's what we're doing today?
I believe so. Yeah.
Because all the other films we've talked about since January 1 have been technically 2023 films.
Right.
I see. So this is the first one with an actual release date of 2024 that
Correct.
we're reviewing. Interesting. Okay. And that film that Chris is alluding to is the film Drive Away Dolls that we'll be discussing in just a little bit from writer-director Ethan Coen, one of the two well-known Coen brothers of film lore. We'll be discussing his solo film, both director and writing, along with his spouse, I believe, right? Trisha Cook.
Correct.
Is the writer of the film. So we'll be discussing Drive Away Dolls here in just a moment in our review of that film. Then we'll also get into, I've got a movie news item to share, kind of an interesting announcement I heard about a series of projects that I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you feel like this is being approached. A film on a very famous subject matter that you and I are big fans of, and be anxious to see what we think about the new film adaptation idea that they're pitching for this. And then I think you also have a recommendation to share with us today too.
I do, yes.
A film recommendation, something we can check out. So we've got a lot to cover. Let's go ahead and jump right into our review, though. It is the film Drive Away Dolls.
What? Don't touch it. I saw this movie once where they come across this box and they open the box.
The case.
And it was like really, really bad.
I just want to know what's going on.
I bet it's locked.
We just want to locate your friends.
Who are you, jackass?
That's when women curse like that.
The Coen brothers entered the collective cinematic consciousness in 1984 with their noir drama, Blood Simple. They'd continue working together over the years and create an oeuvre with hits like Raising Arizona, The Big Lebowski, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? In 2021, Joel Coen directed his first solo film, The Tragedy of Macbeth, with his wife, Frances McDormand, starring as Lady Macbeth. Now in 2024, Ethan Coen has made his solo directorial debut with Drive Away Dolls, a film he co-wrote with, as Alan mentioned, his wife, Trisha Cook, who also acted as the film's editor. Drive Away Dolls tells the story of friends Jamie, who just broke up with her girlfriend, and Marion, who is struggling to find ways to connect with others. In search of a fresh start, they embark on a road trip to Florida, unexpectedly crossing paths with a group of inept criminals. Ethan and Trisha have gone on record saying that this film is actually the first in a planned triptych of lesbian B-movie comedies. The second, entitled Honey Don't, is set to begin production sometime in March. What was your experience with Drive Away Dolls, Alan? And are you looking forward to a successor, Honey Don't?
I had fun with this film.
Okay.
It is going into, gosh, this is tricky because I did ultimately have a fun time with this film. It is not at all what I expected, but I liked what I was delivered. And that it's, I think going into it, there's a little bit of the stigma you have with it being a Coen brother film. Mm-hmm. And we saw what, as you mentioned, The Tragedy of Macbeth was done by Joel Coen.
Right.
So it was kind of interesting to see what the other brother did when given a chance to kind of work on his own project. And I could not see a film almost as completely opposite of Tragedy Macbeth as this film, almost, which is interesting to see. I guess it kind of just goes to show when they did work together, there was a nice blend. This definitely has the elements of the more zany of the Coen Brothers films, which, it definitely echoes and has more of those elements to it. It never quite hits the highs that I was hoping for. I think there are times where I wanted this film to really excel, and it didn't quite ever find, in my mind, the gumption to get there. But it had a fun premise. It had some fun characters. I generally had a good time with it. I can't sit here and harp on it as any like major misgivings with it, other than it did feel like at times it was maybe a little bit of a carbon copy of what we've seen in other films and kind of pulling some elements from the best of the Coen Brothers or the best of a Tarantino film or the best of some other things. It just kind of pulled some elements from it a little bit more than I would have liked to have seen. Wish there would have been a little bit more originality to it. But overall, I think what we got, I had a good time with it. And I'm going to go on the positive with this film. But I got a feeling it's pretty divisive, so I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on it, Chris. What did you think of Drive Away Dolls?
Yeah, I wish I had a good time with the film, but I did not. And you mentioned in your thoughts that kind of it wasn't exactly what you expected, but that was, overall okay. This, having seen the trailer, was not exactly what I expected, and that actually is what hurt the film. In the film, kind of like I mentioned in the setup, it's about two girls, and they go on this road trip. They, have these interactions with the criminals, and they're kind of like running away because, who wants to deal with criminals? So I expected that to be a little bit more like kind of not integral, but to be a little bit more of the plot. And that to me was like, no, that was an excuse to make, kind of what I said in the intro, a lesbian B film.
Right.
Which, not that there's a problem with that, but I just expected there to be more of a plot. And in actuality, it felt to me more like a exploitation film, like a lesbian exploitation film, which there's nothing wrong with that if you want to see that, but that's not what I thought this was. And from the trailer specifically, I mean, obviously they can't show like a bunch of sex scenes in a trailer, but to me, like there was so much of that in the film that kind of took away from my enjoyment, because I was like, well, okay, but like I'd rather see something that has a little bit more narrative arc to it. Add to that, of our two main characters, we have Margaret Qualley as Jamie, and then we have Geraldine Viswanathan as Marion. I knew of Margaret Qualley. I think I've seen her. She had a bit part in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think she was one of the Manson girls in that. Was she also in Poor Things?
She was.
Okay. So I'm aware of her, but I've never really seen her hit center stage.
Yeah.
Well, she definitely did in this. And granted, it's probably, I'm assuming, how her character was written. But she was operating at an intensity of 11 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And I found her extremely annoying. And anytime she spoke, I couldn't wait for her to shut up. So I really disliked her strongly. And like I said, she's one of the two main people in here. Now, a saving grace was Marion, played by Geraldine Viswanathan. I liked her a lot. Now, granted, she's more of the subdued, kind of like hemmed in person who doesn't know how to express herself, which is where Jamie brings her out of her shell. But Geraldine, is still able to communicate. Viswanathan through Marion is still able to communicate humor. And it was the more of the typical kind of dry one-liners that, I appreciate from the Coen brothers, whereas the loud volume of 11 that Jamie's character was doing, or, the character of Jamie was doing, was more of the kind of like, in a way, Holly Hunter in Raising Arizona, except it was like loud and grating. Whereas Holly Hunter's delivery was rapid, but not quite the same. I don't know. It's just,
Well, it's just you look at some of their characters they've written over the years. I mean, you had the Holly Hunter Raising Arizona. You've got the Jennifer Jason Leigh from the Hudsucker Proxy. Just these kind of fast talking, brash, very, very loud. And that's definitely, that was the character they wrote for Jamie.
I just really I couldn't wait for her to be quiet.
And Chris, I don't know. I share some of the same feelings. I do feel like her character was was a lot to absorb, and I don't know if it's a problem with the writing of the character or the performance that Margaret Qualley gave it. I'm not sure. It's somewhere between the two. But it doesn't work. I agree with you. It's a bit too much. And I just feel like it's at times trying to play a Coen Brothers character, but overdoing it. And again, not sure if that's because of how it's written or the performance given. My bigger issue with the two leads is I just never felt any connection between the two of them or chemistry at all.
Absolutely not.
And again, you're right. A lot of the film does start to hinge on more of the relationship between the two of them. So obviously you want there to be a good connection, and I never quite felt that at all. I don't think the film did a really good job or a great service of giving us any understanding of the nature of their relationship from the beginning and why we should or shouldn't care if they are drawn to each other or not drawn to each other or whatever it may be. None of that was really kind of explored. So yeah, it was very slighted in that side.
I couldn't buy the relationship because I obviously was not in love with Jamie's character, and then I couldn't understand why Marion would want to spend any time with her whatsoever. And actually, the girlfriend that I mentioned that Jamie's character breaks up with kind of in the opening little bit of the film, Suki, as played by Beanie Feldstein, I could actually see a little bit more, like she had more, I don't know, they actually talked together in a club when they're at a club.
We had a setup for her character. We understood where her character was and what her role was, and she played that role, I thought, just fine. So I liked her performance. I thought that was in her role.
There's other people in this cast. I mean, it's kind of to be a B movie, it's actually kind of a stacked cast. We have Coleman Domingo, Pedro Pascal. We already mentioned Beanie Feldstein. We have Matt Damon, and then a character actor guy who's always awesome when he's on screen, kind of Bill Camp. He was also in there. So, you got, and if you're going, which they're shown in the trailer, both Pedro Pascal and Matt Damon are shown in the trailer, which you kind of get a feeling because this is a lower budget movie that, their work on this movie probably took half a day of shooting.
Very, very, very short.
Very, very minimal. But just you've got so much of a good cast there that, I feel like, again, kind of wasted. But
yeah, I'm still giving the film an overall general pass because I at least found myself having a slightly good time while watching it. I know Chris is shaking his head, so we disagree on that. I found enough to feel like it kept my attention, kept me going, but again, its flaws are pretty evident. And, the more you sit and think about the film afterwards, it's like it definitely is glowing and more, it shines on more of those weak spots for sure.
Well, I think if it didn't have the pedigree of the Coen name attached to it, I would probably give it more of a pass.
Well, you see, I
have an expectation of like, okay, if this is just a random B movie put out by someone who maybe can't get the funding or can't get the actors involved to make a A-list movie, then okay, I get it. But they have the wherewithal and they chose to go this route. Okay, interesting thing to do. But I just thought the film suffered. Let me give you another example of how it suffered. Mm-hmm. And she apparently, Trisha Cook, has acted as an editor on some other Coen Brothers movies. Mm-hmm. It's not like this is her first editing job. Yeah. She's actually a filmmaker in her own right who also writes stuff. So, but she was listed as the editor on this. They do this odd, in the very beginning, kind of like what you would assume kind of like an 80s movie where they do these like jerky transitions of like, the picture sliding over another one clunking into paste, just like the whole picture itself. They do these odd transitions that I guess are to try to give it a little bit of comedic tone, but those totally drop away. And actually then it shifts to these really out of place, makes no sense, lava lamp tie-dye transitions, especially with the film taking place in 1999. It starts off, it always is in 1999, but it starts off in Philadelphia and then they make the road trip to Florida. So it's just like, I didn't get it. And then at the very end, there's kind of tying in a little bit of the Matt Damon. You finally see Matt Damon and you get a sense of like, okay, that makes sense for that one transition, but the other 3 or 4 that were used, and it was like, and they weren't just like quick just to get from one scene to the other. It was like this experiential tie-dye drug trip that made no sense because nobody in the film was having a drug trip. No, and they were longer than they needed to be just to kind of maybe give the film some extra runtime, because this was, thankfully, blissfully short at 84 minutes, so they didn't overstay their welcome. But it was like some of the transition time, my wife who saw the film with me kind of leaned over and was like, what is going on? I'm like, I'm not really sure. And then at the end, I was like, okay, I guess you could use that as an excuse, but it doesn't really work. It just doesn't really work, period. It didn't really work for me. So,
well, you mentioned about expectations, and I honestly tried really hard going in to like extinguish any expectations. I mean, again, I don't want to judge a film just because the last name of the director and just assume that, okay, well, it has to be a certain caliber and level. If it's not, I'm going to be disappointed. So I guess maybe me going in, clearing those expectations, say, all right, let's just see the film on its own merit. I walked away okay with it, but there are definitely issues. There are definitely problems. The transitional things didn't bother me. I mean, I thought they were a little overindulgent at times, but
did you understand the two different classes of them, the tie-dye ones versus the image transitions? Like, did you understand why they used more of the, or just didn't stick with one the whole way through?
Yeah, the whole 60s kind of flashback transitions. I mean, yeah, I kind of picked up on where that was heading. Yeah, I don't want to get too suggestive or graphic with my description, but they're definitely in those scenes, those psychedelic kind of flashback scenes. There's some people in those scenes and actions they're performing that I'm like, okay, I totally get what's happening now. This is because again, it's a little bit of some things happening in the past that come up and become part of the plot point in the present. It does take the end of the film to kind of get to that point and see it all together, but it worked okay for me. I just thought they were a little indulgent, but again, you're right. It was an hour, 24 minutes. I mean, it was a pretty short film to begin with already.
I feel like 20 of those minutes were the transitions, but
Yeah, they could have been.
And something else, like I was just surprised. And there again, I mean, I can't help not know that this is Ethan Coen. Right? It's like, expectations. I knew this wasn't supposed to be their next Oscar film. I knew it was kind of like something he was doing as a side project, just like Tragedy Macbeth. But that said, dropping the thread, which I didn't really understand, other than it's supposed to be like, I guess a joke, but it could have been better developed, was the whole reading of Henry James. Marion's character is reading a Henry James book. Okay. Coleman Domingo is shown at one point reading Henry James' book. So it seems like, okay, and he's, one of the bad guys. So you're like, okay, that's somehow going to be like a funny joke or a point of, commonality between no, just totally dropped, except for at the very end, which I really didn't understand. There's a kind of end of credits gag where they like change the title of the movie and it's like Henry James's Drive Away Dykes instead of Drive Away Dolls. And I'm like, okay. And that's the payoff for that joke. Just very haphazard and not, in my opinion, very well thought through. Something else I don't get, other than they wouldn't have had a problem achieving an R rating with this film because of like all the sex scenes. But in the very beginning, they do some, as you kind of alluded to, some Quentin Tarantino over the top violence that is just kind of dumb. And I'm not spoiling anything because this happens in the very opening seconds of the movie. Someone gets a corkscrew stuck in his neck, then a pin jabbed in his neck, and then is decapitated. Okay. Okay. I'm not really sure. And if violence is going to play a thread throughout the movie, then okay, you're establishing this like over the top, Tarantino level of violence. But then that's kind of dropped. And not only that, but the fact that the person's decapitated and they keep his head around, like, what was the point in that? There's no point, because that is one of the items that is in the trunk of the car that the girls have that are in the car driving down to Florida. But that doesn't really matter. Now, the other case that they have, which is kind of another allusion to like a Tarantino type film or one of those noir films where you never really know what's in the case and they keep everything, okay. But the head, like, it doesn't mean anything. Like, it doesn't serve any purpose. It's just there to, again, just things that were just frustrating for me because it seems like it could have been developed or could have worked a little harder on making it make sense or have a point. And it just didn't. So,
Okay.
So obviously I am a lot lower on the film than you are. It sounds like you at least give it a pass. And actually, honestly, I was thinking, what would I rate? You know, we usually do leave ratings on Letterboxd. What would I rate this film? Definitely not a 3. So that means it struggles between the 2 and the 1. And I think I'd probably give it a 1.5, which is probably one of the lower ratings
It is.
I've given a film in a long time. So
And believe me, I am not here to say that your opinion or anybody's opinion on this is, it's all your own personal take on the film. So I think there was more to this to enjoy than there was to hate, but I will accept that the film did have some flaws. I do wonder how much of perception is based on expectation.
Well, sure.
A little bit of that, which again, I'm trying to set that aside and say, I think it was enjoyable enough. Look, I'll tell you this, as many flaws as the film may have and how not every part of it worked for me. And I had issues with
what part of it did work for you? I'm curious. Cause I know you're, and it's fine, you know, we're differing, but like, was there, if you didn't like the relationship between Marion and Jamie,
well, I didn't like their relationship towards one another, but I did enjoy the situations they would find themselves in. I enjoyed the premise of they're driving down to Florida to do the road trip.
Okay.
And along the way, they're finding all of the lesbian bars that they can go and hit along the way, which it's kind of a fun little idea. And there were some fun moments, I thought, in some of those encounters and some of those drop-ins as well.
Okay.
Yeah, when it didn't feel like it needed to fit into this crime drama, you know, a plot line. It just let the two characters be characters and we got to see their dynamics. It's a little bit of an odd couple situation that kind of played for most of it. And that part of it worked okay for me. Where it didn't work is when we're expected to believe that the two of them actually have a deeper relationship than what we see. And that I never bought that.
It sounds like, I'm not forgiving of that and you're more forgiving of that. So, okay. Yeah. I could see like the road trip aspect.
The road trip part I enjoyed. And there were some fun moments I thought with the dumb criminals. I mean, it's a typical Coen Brothers, like these are the idiot criminals that, you know, are kind of, some of their banter, some of their situations I thought were kind of amusing and fun. I don't know. There was enough. Look, I'll say this. The film might have won me over. Barely. Just pushed me over the edge to say, like, I'm going to be okay with this.
Okay.
And it is a scene with Major List A-star, what's his name?
Matt Damon?
Matt Damon.
Okay.
Towards the end of the film, there's a confrontation that happens. There's a trading of, you know, money and items to share, and just the short little bit that Matt Damon has to say about the contents of that suitcase and commenting on that, I did think was one of the funniest things I've heard in a while. So I'm like, all right, that kind of got me over. If the whole point of this film was to get to that scene, to deliver this suitcase to this politician and let him make a very heartfelt, dramatic speech about the people that suitcase represents, like that was worth it for me. So that was a fun moment. I appreciated that.
It's a long way to get. It's 80 minutes to get to one joke, and
it could have been 2.5 hours, but it was 80 minutes to get there. I'm like, it was. And
I did laugh at that, but by that point, I was so worn down by Margaret Qualley's Jamie that I was like, ugh. Yeah, she was like. a middle school band playing in my ear every time she spoke that was out
Oh, yeah.
of tune and didn't know what they were doing.
Well, I
and
mean,
never
look,
played a song. Like that's what that was like for me.
I mean,
So.
but that's also how she's supposed to be. Now,
Right, I just
whether or
found
not,
it-
whether
yeah.
or not it was a little overdone, which I think it might have been.
Which maybe that's also the point. I just found it really grating.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Well, look, I think there's enough here for a relatively decent fun time. It is not a great movie. It is definitely got flaws. It doesn't cohesively work the way you would want it to, but I found enough there to find some level of enjoyment. It's a 2.5, 3 star for me. It's not a high rated one. It's just kind of middle of the ground for me, but it sounds like you definitely had a lesser experience
Yes.
with the film. So
I think that's fair.
understandably. And I get it. I totally do. I'm like, I if somebody says they hate this film, I'm like, yep, I get it. It's like, I get it.
Right.
It is not a film that is going to be endearing to everybody. It's very much a hit or miss because of the complete dichotomy of different tones and things thrown at you and the lead character, whether you can embrace her or not. Yeah, there's a lot of things that could cause people not to like this film. So
I'll
I get it.
close out my thoughts on this. I'm interested. I don't know if I want to see it or not, but it sounds like you would be more willing to give the next film, Honey Don't, in this trilogy a chance. Something that makes me feel like, okay, maybe the first one didn't work. Maybe the second one would work better for me. But in theory, and this movie starts shooting this month in March, in theory, Margaret Qualley is also scheduled to be in that film as well. So are they, I don't know, is it going to be like following her story for 3 movies or is this just a different,
or creating like a little kind of mini universe of this. And,
Right.
and these are just characters that pop into each one. So, I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, maybe if they use her again, maybe they'll figure out how to get her character a little better defined. Another thing I realized that was a problem with her character is I never really got a sense of a tone or who exactly she was. Part of that is because she's always putting on a big act and kind of a big show. But there's also times where she's seems incredibly foolhardy and kind of brave in a weird way and like willing to take all these risks. But then there'll be other moments where something happens and they've got her shrieking like a teenage girl, just over extremes in different directions, her character. And I think that probably did not help the way, viewers are perceiving her in the film.
Right.
Because again, we just never really kind of grab a hold of exactly who she is.
Right.
We see her as an extreme, vivacious personality and very, always up on stage, always performing, always this. And then we see her very scared and very meek and very other times too. And it's just, it was a weird mixture and it didn't settle her character very well. I don't think so. Anyway, just another little bit on that. The film definitely has some things to work through if they're going to continue this kind of storyline for sure. So, all right. Well, that is Drive Away Dolls. Again, kind of a little bit of a mixed reaction from us here, but neither one of us saying we love this film at all. Chris, kind of just, I don't want to say, you never want to use the word hate. Hate's a strong word. You dislike this film.
I dislike this film. I wouldn't say I hated it.
You
but
dislike this film.
I
I found it passable entertainment and enjoyed elements of it enough to sit through the 84-minute running time. So I'll say that. Okay.
Fair enough.
All right. Now let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we've got news items to cover, or a news item, but it's a news item about 4 film projects.
Okay.
We'll leave it at that. And then Chris is going to have a recommendation of a film that we may want to check out. So stay tuned for Foot Candle Films coming back in just a minute.
This podcast is sponsored by Jackson Creative, a custom communication agency located in downtown Hickory, North Carolina, specializing in online content creation. To learn more, visit thejacksoncreative.com. Jackson Creative, we tell your story.
Welcome back to Foot Candle Films here on the Mesh.tv podcast network. Alan Jackson and Chris Fry with you. During the little short break here, we just explored more about Drive Away Dolls, and I think I convinced Chris to like it now. Did I? No, I didn't.
I don't know about that.
No, we're still a little split on that, but always kind of fun when we have some differing opinions.
Sure.
Especially we saw that film in the theater at the same time, just
We
on
did.
opposite ends of the theater. So there's no way to gauge each other's reaction to the film,
Right.
which is always, I think, the way you got to do it. So
Sure.
it's good. All right, Chris, I do want to share with you a kind of our movie news segment. I wish we had like little segment intros for each of these. We never got around to actually doing any, but we do news almost every week. So
Sure.
kind of felt we need something, but whatever. I'm not going to try to sing anything or do any kind of jingle for it. Just
Well,
know
that's-
this is
that's
our,
disappointing.
I know. I'm sorry. I built that up and then I let you down. So this is our movie news segment. Chris, I have a interesting story. Don't know if you've heard it or not.
I think you're going to tell me about they've decided to make 4 movies about Slinky, and that's an IP that I've always been fascinated. No,
Oh, right,
I have
right.
no idea.
Yeah, you knew that. Yeah, the Barbie is such a big hit. Now they're taking every possible toy and turning it. No, not quite.
Okay,
So the Beatles. You're familiar with them.
yes,
They were a band, in case anybody's not aware.
they did rather well.
They did pretty good for themselves. John, Paul, George, and Ringo, the 4 Beatles of that band. So there have been some movies made about the Beatles in a kind of offhanded way. Never a direct
Right.
like Beatles.
Backbeat
movie.
is one of the ones I'm
Backbeat
thinking
is
of.
one, and that kind of covered early days
right.
of the Beatles. There was one about John Lennon that was it Nowhere Boy?
Yes, or Nowhere Man, or
Nowhere
yeah,
Man,
yeah,
Nowhere,
yeah.
yeah. That was kind of all about John Lennon,
Right.
focused on him. But other than that, we really haven't had anything. I mean, they've been featured in movies,
Sure.
like parts of movies, like historical films that the Beatles play a part in it.
Or
But
like the Altered History Yesterday, that was kind of
Right,
like, what if
yes.
somebody else had written
Okay,
their songs?
That's
Yeah.
a good one too.
Sure.
But never an actual biopic of the Beatles.
Got you.
So, Chris, what if I told you that we're not going to get just one, we're going to get 4. And they're going to be making, it's been announced, director Sam Mendes.
Okay, American
who
Beauty
is
guy.
American Beauty. He also did 2 of the Daniel Craig's James Bond films, Skyfall and Spectre. He did 1917. I think that was Empire of Light was his most recent film.
Okay,
that we did,
which we
Okay.
discussed on the show, I think. Okay.
I liked it. I generally like his films.
Sure.
I can't say I really love any of them, but I do like them. I think he's a good director.
Skyfall, I think, is the best James Bond movie ever
Absolutely.
made. So
Although
he was
Spectre,
responsible.
the second one he did was not so great.
True.
But Sam Mendes is going to be making 4 movies, 1 for each of the Beatles members.
As much as I like the Beatles, I just went to see the Cirque du Soleil show in Vegas. Love that the Beatles music is used in. I like the Beatles. I don't know if 4 movies. That seems a little. That seems a lot.
Yeah. Well, here's my issue. Okay, so basically, let me set this up a little bit more.
Sure.
So it's going to be 4 movies, 1 for each of the 4 characters and 4 members. It's going to be a biopic of that member, and the idea is that they're going to all 4 of them will kind of obviously blend together in a way that if you watch them like as a series, they're all going to kind of be in parallel track with one another, and then they're going to all culminate with the 1970s when they broke up, when they kind of ended the band.
Oh wow!
So they're all going to kind of
It's
culminate.
not just going to do their like being alone, and then when they get in the Beatles, that's where the film ends. No, you're saying it's actually going to track all the way.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But it's all going to be from their own perspective.
I got that seems even tougher because by the time you get to, I wonder if they'll do it in the order everybody says their names: John, Paul, George, and Ringo. So Ringo will be the last. Maybe I don't know what order they'll do it in, but by the time you get to that 4th time, you're seeing the commonality point. I would think that would be kind of brutal. So I kind of feel sorry for whoever's that 4th movie because you're like, okay, now we're in the Beatles part. Like, even though I get it, it's from their perspective, but still,
I think you could pull it off. I mean, I think I kind of understand the idea because all 4 of them are going to have different perspectives,
Sure.
different experiences along the way.
Sure.
But obviously they all had some common touch points in their career where all 4 of them were very much involved in what was happening. So yeah, I could see building to this 1970 point. So you're watching these biographies of all 4 and they all kind of come together at the end. My issue is,
Paul McCartney is a producer. Ringo Starr's a producer?
No. My issue is that Sam Mendes has already been tapped to do all four. And I'm like, okay.
Okay, now that, yeah.
Because my thing is like, all right, well, what if the first one sucks? And, what if it's just no good? And then all of a sudden now we've got to like go through three more because you got to have to do it. Like you got to do all four if you're going to do it this way. And you don't want to like do Paul first and then be like, okay, well, nobody liked this film. It was horrible. We're scrapping the other three. You're not going to do it. You got to do all four. Now, I was reading through Variety. Owen Gleiberman, writer for Variety, actually was writing an article about this. And he's like, when did Sam Mendes earn the right to direct 4 Beatles biopics? Which I think is kind of funny.
Not just a, but it's like, when did he earn the right to do all 4?
But he gave a scenario, a kind of like a fantastical scenario of like, what if it was 4 Beatles biopics, each one directed by a different director, kind of with their own spin on that particular character.
And Baz Luhrmann doing one.
Well, he threw out like, it just as an example, he's like, what if it was, Linklater, Scorsese, Greta Gerwig, Todd Haynes, like each of those get to direct their own take on a character that a member that they want to most associate with.
And see, that would be fascinating because Haynes is into music. Scorsese has done a George Harrison documentary. So
right.
Well,
I mean, there's definitely reasons that he chose those 4 directors.
Sure.
And when I start to think about that, I'm like, okay, now that's something. I would totally do that because even if it's like, okay, I don't like Linklater's George biography movie.
Sure.
But Greta Gerwig's Ringo is coming up, and I am so excited for that. It's like that would work. But and you could totally make it work. Have all 4 directors say, look, you can tell your biopic of this person. It just has to end here at this point. So all 4 films kind of end at the same spot. Like do anything you want to do up to that point, but it just has to come to that spot. That would be fascinating. I would love that, but that's not what they're doing. Sam Mendes gets to do all 4. And nothing against Sam Mendes. He's a good director, but
right.
I haven't seen him do anything that makes me think a Beatles biopic is like a perfect fit for him to do. And to go ahead and entrust 4
it's a lot
of like, what we could argue is the greatest musical group of all time. And these 4 musicians, you kind of want this to be the biography of these 4, like, I don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot to put on and trust in one person, and it's a big gamble, I think, too. So
I agree. The thing, very nervous about it, but I love the Beatles, so I'm excited to see what ends up happening. Even though it is 4, I will say, one of the reasons we haven't really had, something come out about the Beatles that's kind of what we're talking about. We've never had something exactly like this, or even a biopic of just the Beatles and have it be that way. Is they're very protective of their legacy. The 2 surviving Beatles, Ringo and Paul, they're very protective. And I remember when the Cirque du Soleil show I was mentioning, Love got made in Las Vegas. It was a big deal because they had to license all the music. And Paul McCartney read on record and saying like, I don't want people to just use the Beatles music. It has to be something, truly unique that you're kind of like even changing the way we think about things. Like it has to be a big deal. So when they gave him kind of the idea and they showed him out and he's like, okay, you have the blessing. You may do this now. So the fact that this is what we're getting, I just think maybe the reason we are getting 4 and the reason that Sam Mendes, maybe he like pitched an idea is like, here's what I want to do. I want to do 4. This is why I want to. And like, they're maybe. Like, okay.
Well, I
get it.
I'll back you up on that. So yes. Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and the families of the late John Lennon and George Harrison have all 4 granted full life story and music rights. So you don't have to worry about any issues with not being able to use certain music or tracks or whatever.
Got you.
Full rights, all signed off.
Okay.
Now, whether they signed off because it's Sam Mendes or they had already signed off to the project, but the producers are putting together, and now Sam Mendes is tapped as director, I don't know. But that is a comforting thing that they are all 4 estates are on board and like willing to give full rights to do this. It makes me think, okay, there is a plan,
right?
And they feel good about it. But
and see there again, that whole like making something a unique. That was why they got Danny Boyle got passed off for Yesterday because he's like, okay, here's the idea: Beatles song. I need to use the music, but what if they didn't write them? And they're like, okay. Yeah. Okay. So they're like, that's unique enough that yes, we'll give you rights to it. So yeah, I'm excited, but I agree with you. 4 Seems like a lot. And what if you really don't like the first one?
Well, as I was going to say, they're releasing all 4 films right now theatrically in the same year,
Really?
2027.
Gee whiz.
They're going
2027.
to work for the next 3 years on these films.
Wow.
Plans are Sony Pictures is financing and distributing them, releasing them all in 2027.
So they're doing concurrent filming.
I would assume so, or it's a one large shoot.
Right.
I mean, you got to think
And
that
then
there's
divide.
probably some value in that. They're going to have some consistent sets and
Right.
consistent places where it's
Right.
like, okay, now we're going to shoot from Ringo's perspective this scene. Now we're going to shoot from George's perspective.
So it's like doing the
there's
Lord of the
some-
Rings
some-
movies all at the same
there's
time.
some
Yeah, yeah.
shared
Okay.
resources, I'm sure, doing it all. And that may be one of the values in doing it with a single director too, is that it kind of makes the films a little bit more budget conscious. Is that, okay,
Right.
we have a master plan of how we're going to film all 4 characters' stories. There's going to be, certain percentage of the film that is the same scenes or the same sets or locations across all 4. We're just shooting it from a different person's perspective in their story.
Sure.
And that, there's some interest there. Okay.
Yeah.
There's some things that could be interesting.
It's either going to go off like gangbusters, or I think it's going to be bad. But hopefully, I hope for it to be good, because I do like the Beatles, and I always want movies to do well, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that they're all going to be released within the same year, 2027.
That's the plan right now,
The
yes.
plan. But we don't know the release order.
No.
Okay, that really is fascinating to me, because I think, yeah, that's fascinating.
Well, the studio has only been quoted as saying is that, they say details about the release plans will be shared later.
Okay.
But the studio promises the strategy will be, quote, innovative and groundbreaking.
Well,
I mean, they're itself releasing 4 films 3 months apart from each other, if that's what they're doing throughout the year, that all share the same story, just different persons' perspectives
Okay,
on them.
what if-
that is kind of innovative? and
What
we'll
if?
see. Yeah.
What if? The first date you go to see the movie, but all it's called is the Beatles, and you don't know which Beatle it's going to focus on until you go in and sit down and watch it.
Okay.
Now, granted, after you sit down and watch it, you're like, okay, I just saw John's story, and then everybody will get the word out. Okay, this first one's on John. But what if the first, somehow they make it a secret, like they try to do
That's
with
kind of
the
interesting.
Crying Game, where they're like, okay, you don't know whose story. Now, granted, by the time you get to the 4th one, duh.
Yeah. Yeah. we
It's
got
the one-
we got Ringo in December. We know that. So.
we're good. We know that. So what if I think that would actually be kind of cool. is
Okay.
You actually
I could
don't
see
know.
that. I could see that.
So it'd be a big surprise element. So yeah, I don't know.
Look, I'm curious about the approach they're taking.
Yeah.
I'm just a bit concerned that they've already tapped the one director to do all 4. I mean, not even like Star Wars movies tap the same director like way in advance to go ahead and do all 3, 4 movies. I mean,
Right.
you always kind of have to play and see, is this going to work? So it's a little nerve wracking, but I guess the idea is they rip the Band-Aid. They say, we're going to release them all in the same year. If the
and
first
we're
one
going to
sucks,
shoot them all at the same time.
yeah, it's like if people hate the first one, well, we got 9 more months to suffer through putting these films out, for people to deal with. So
and they probably, I guess, also bank on, which they're probably right, there's enough Beatles fandom that are diehard. They'll even go hate watch it.
Look, these things will be hits no matter
Okay.
what. The first one will be a monster hit.
Well, yeah, because so many people.
Then it
sure.
just depends on how good that first one is as to whether the other 3 are also good. This could be a huge, a big deal. This could be a big, big thing for a year of 2027, where these become 4 of the biggest grossing movies in a single year of the same
wow,
series.
yeah.
That could be crazy. And it's possible. I mean, look, I'm going to go see it. I'll go see all 4 of them in the year.
Think about
I have no problem.
how hard it's going to be for the 4 main leads. They're all going to be in competition for the Oscar that year if it's good.
Yeah, you're right.
So
no, that's crazy.
because I can't imagine, at least one of them, I would think, of the 4 films will get nominated. But how about if 2? That's going to be, because they're each going to have their own movie where they're the focus.
Well, that's
Wow.
assuming it comes out exactly within the calendar
True,
year, not
true,
like
true,
one
true.
spills over to the next year
Right.
or whatever.
Right.
I don't know. We've got a lot of musical biopics happening right now, for better or for worse.
Right.
Bob Marley's film came out a couple weeks ago. It actually has done better than expected box office wise and held up. We had Baz Luhrmann's Elvis a year or 2 ago. Antoine Fuqua is working on Michael Jackson's story into a feature film.
I was not aware of that.
Yep.
Okay.
We have the Amy Winehouse biopic coming out soon with Back in Black. We talked, I think, about Ridley Scott doing the Bee Gees movie. We talked
We
about
did.
last week or 2.
Right.
There's a lot happening in the music side. I mean, there always has been, but it seems like it might be a little bit more going on the next 2 to 3 years in musical biopics. And I'm of mixed emotions on that. I love a good musical biopic, but I'm always very disappointed when one just kind of paints by numbers and does the expected and it doesn't work. So we will see. We will definitely see. Sam Mendes directing all 4 Beatles movies.
That's crazy.
So, Chris, with that, I know we're like several years out from that. So why don't you tell us about a film that's available now that we could watch, a recommendation you want to give to us on this episode?
Sure. So I'm going to recommend a film that looked at young women struggling with their sexual identity and being not accepted as lesbians, that worked better for me, and was a comedy that came out in 2023. It is Bottoms, starring Rachel Sennett and Ayo Edebiri, and it was directed by Emma Seligman. And the story is these girls are in high school, and they decide to start a fight club as a way to lose their virginities to cheerleaders. The fight club gains traction, and soon the most popular girls in school are beating each other up in the name of self-defense. But the pair find themselves in over their heads and in need of a way out before their plan is exposed. Not a perfect movie, but I rated it 3 stars, but it is enjoyable. It was funny, and it is from, a different perspective than normal a high school teenage sex comedy is from. And the 2 leads, Rachel Sennett and Ayo Edebiri, they're great. And I wish the first 20 or 30 minutes for me was really, really strong. And then it kind of, once the plot got kind of going, it kind of fell off a little bit. But they are quite the comedic duo. I think they are friends as well. They may have been like roommates in college or something like that. They're definitely like good friends. And I think that kind of shows in like their chemistry and how they're comfortable with one another and stuff. Plus the Bottoms had some really odd, like kind of surreal things. There's like the football players are always in uniform, like even during the school day, they're just every day, they're just always in uniform. Like so they're like little touches. There's one football player guy who's like rabid and is kept in a cage at the back of a classroom, like just really random things that are funny.
I like that.
So Bottoms, it's available on Amazon Prime. Plus you can stream it there for free if you have Amazon Prime, but then you can rent it all sorts of places. So that is a film that worked much better for me. That was a comedy, Bottoms. So.
Okay. Well, good. So Chris, I appreciate what you did in this episode. You tore down a film that you did not like,
yes.
and I completely understand why. And but you replaced it,
yes,
at the end of the episode with a recommendation of one you felt like worked better.
Yeah,
it was more enjoyable.
Absolutely,
that's good. It's kind of you're balancing the scales of film criticism here, which is great. So that's good. You take one down, you put one back in. So right. I think that's a good move for you there. So. All right, so that is our episode. We had our review of Drive Away Dolls. We talked about the Beatles biopic movies coming out in 2027, and Chris's recommendation of the film Bottoms. Bottoms just came out last year. I mean, it was just like latter half of 2023.
I believe so.
I think it came out. All right, cool. All right, well, Chris, if anybody has any thoughts, feedback, recommendations on anything we talked about, or just wants to chat with us about what we're discussing. Do you have ideas on who should play the 4 Beatles in these 4 biopic movies? That's another thing we got to get into at some point.
The casting.
Do a little speculation on casting. Anyway, how do people get a hold of us if they want to talk about any of these things?
You can send an email to info@footcandle.org. You can follow us on Twitter @FootCandleFilm, Facebook, Foot Candle Film Society, Instagram and Threads. We're both on there just simply as Foot Candle Film. Al and I do keep accounts on Letterboxd where we try to track what we're seeing and leave quick takes sometimes. Do us a favor. If you like the show, consider giving us a star rating, write a review, or share with friends on whatever service you receive your favorite podcast on, because it'll help us reach new listeners, which we'd appreciate.
Yeah, sounds great. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening today, and we will look forward to talking to you guys next time in another week or so when we have another film to review and some more news and recommendations to share. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
See you in the ticket line.
Watch films in the company of like-minded people in the dark. Watch films in the underground. We won't let anyone know where you are. The films that don't make it to Carmike at the mall, or ones that were famous
Special thanks to Carpal Tuller for the show theme music. For more about Carpal Tuller, visit www.carpaltuller.com. You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.